subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar on PowerPoint hacks, tips and tricks. Now in this webinar today we're going to look at some PowerPoint hacks that you should know in order to create PowerPoint presentations that are slick, modern, audience appropriate and most importantly engaging, because that's what it's all about. And what I really want you to walk away from this presentation today is feeling inspired to really go back and the next time that you're asked to create a presentation, have some new ideas, play around with imagery, fonts, icons, all of that kind of stuff. So the next time that your manager comes to you and asks you to put together a presentation, you can really wow them. And what I find over the many years that I've trained PowerPoint is that people in general tend to use PowerPoint in the wrong way. Now, PowerPoint isn't your presentation, it's just the tool that you use to design and deliver that presentation. So really what it should do is be there to enhance what you as the presenter are saying, not distract. And it should also be used to present data in a clear and effective way. And I'm sure many of us over the years have sat through numerous very dull PowerPoint presentations. I know I have, where we just have slide after slide full of text, not particularly interesting. So today I'm going to show you how to make things super interesting and also show you some new tools that you might not have used before to really add some pizzazz. And what I find is so often I hear people say that they don't really know where to begin or that they aren't a designer and so find it difficult. So again, I'm going to show you kind of like a formula to just creating a PowerPoint presentation. It's really simple. You don't have to be any kind of designer, but if you follow certain steps, then you can put together something that looks really nice. So let's move into our first slide. Now, as I was putting this presentation together last night, this is the slide I always use to introduce myself. So I'm going to do that now for anybody who's new to our webinars. So my name is Deborah Ashby. I'm an IT trainer, Microsoft subject matter expert, and it's basically my job to design, deliver, facilitate Microsoft training courses, both online and in the classroom. Now, as I've been speaking there, you can see on this slide, I have quite a lot of text and it's quite difficult for you to read that text and listen to me speak. It's also not particularly that interesting, and I don't want to say anything too negative about Adam's lovely Simon Says It template just here, but it's not really that interesting. So I thought to myself, how can I kick off this webinar? How about I start by just showing you a different way of thinking about designing slides by redesigning this particular slide. So let's move on to my redesign, and I just want to highlight a few points to you. So straight away, what you can see here is something that looks a little bit different. Now, the most obvious thing here is the photo that I've used. In my previous slide, I had a more professional photo, whereas now I have a picture of me on my holidays. So straight away, for anybody who's looking at this presentation, they get more of a sense of who I am because I'm showing them things that I enjoy doing. Now, this is a really important point that a lot of people miss, particularly if you're somebody who does give a lot of presentations. It's really important that your audience connects with you as a presenter. And the more little things about yourself that you can pepper in without it being too overwhelming, the better, okay? What I've also done here is I've taken a look at the fonts that I've been using and I've updated all of my fonts to a more modern style. So it kind of gets away from Calibri, Arial, all of those general things. I'm now using a more modern font. I've cut down on the amount of text that I have on the slide, and I've also used iconography as well, just to make it a little bit more interesting. And if you notice when this came in, I used a little bit of animation that adds to the slide as opposed to detracting from the points that are coming up. So just a few minor changes there, which have really taken this slide from being kind of a bit boring to slightly more interesting for the people who are viewing it. So I just wanted to put that out there right at the beginning so you can kind of see the difference. So staying on this theme, let's move across to our agenda, which I've kept in that similar kind of style. So these are the items that we're going to cover today. I've picked 10 or so that we're going to go through. And the way that I've chosen these are things that I use all the time and things that I've learned along the way that I find are really, really helpful and also help me create presentations that look really effective. Now, everything that I'm using in this presentation when it comes to images, icons, all of that kind of stuff, right at the end of the session, we're going to take a look at these resources because everything I'm using today is a free resource that you can use in your presentations. And that's a key point because one of the things that people struggle with is knowing which images to use, finding a place where they can download free images without any copyright they have to worry about in order to use in their presentations. So we're going to do that right at the end. But let's start by jumping into our content and that first point, aligning objects on a slide. So I'm going to come out of here for the time being, and we're just going to jump across to, let me scroll to the top here, this first presentation. Now, I want to start out by talking to you about something which is a major bugbear of mine. Now, nothing makes a PowerPoint presentation look unprofessional quite like objects that aren't aligned correctly on the slide. So if I jump across to slide 2, you can see an example of that. Now, this is a pretty extreme example. You can see here, all of these circles and the icons within them are not lined up. There's also inconsistent spacing between my text just here. Now, as I said, this is quite extreme. Obviously, I've put this together for demonstration purposes. A lot of the time, if you receive a PowerPoint presentation, the misalignment of objects will be a bit more subtle because people will try their best to line up things on a page without necessarily knowing the correct way to do it. So you can see that something is slightly off as opposed to very off like we have here. So one of the most important things is making sure that you know all the different tools you have that are going to make your life a lot easier when it comes to lining things up on your slides. So let's start out by doing that. So here, the first thing you can see is I have icons within these circles, and the icons, for the most part, are not dead in the center of these circles. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to select the circle. I'm going to hold down Shift and select the icon. So essentially, I've selected 2 objects. If I go up to my home ribbon, I have an arrange drop down. And if I go to align, I can then use these tools to center these objects. So I'm going to say align center. I'm going to go back to arrange and then do align middle. And that puts that icon right in the middle of that shape. I'm going to do it again, but this time I'm going to make my selection in a slightly different way. So previously I selected by clicking, holding down Shift and clicking. If you want to select objects, you can also just drag around and it will select both of the objects for you, which is sometimes a lot quicker if you have a lot of objects that you need to select. I'm going to go back up to arrange and do the same thing, align center, and then down again and align middle, just to center that in that respect. Now, one thing I would advise that you do is I find myself using the alignment tools all the time. So to make my life a bit easier, so I don't have to keep jumping into this menu, I will always add align center and align middle to my quick access toolbar to make them super easy to access. So I'm going to right click on align center, add to quick access toolbar, and I'm going to do the same for align middle. Right click, add to quick access toolbar. So now I have both of these icons just here, making it really easy for me to find them. So let's do the last 2. I'm going to draw around this again, align center, align middle, draw around to select, align center, align middle. So now I have my icons lined up within my shapes. Those all are looking good. But I still need to line up all of the shapes. Okay, so I want all of these to be in a line. Now, the way that I do this is I'm going to need to start adding in some grouping. because currently if I was to click on either the icon or the circle and align these, it's just going to align whichever object I'm clicked on. So what I want to do is go through and group the icon and the shape together. So I'm going to select both objects, and a quick way to group objects is by pressing the Control-G keyboard shortcut, which essentially makes them all one object. So let's go through and do the rest. So I'm going to select, Control-G to group, select again, Control-G, select once more, Control-G. So now I have all of these grouped together. I can then select the whole lot, and again I can just drag around like so, and then I can use my alignment tools to put these in line. So I'm going to say Align Object Center to align them like so. Now, one thing you might notice is that it's fairly close, but I do have inconsistent spacing in between these circles. So if you look at the bottom one here, the spacing between these two circles is a little bit wider down here than it is further up. So another tool that you have in order to make this spacing even, if we jump up to Arrange and go down to Align, we have Distribute Horizontally and Distribute Vertically. So if I select Distribute Vertically, it's a very slight movement, but now I have equal spacing in between each of my objects. Okay, so really important, those alignment utilities. And as I said, I would encourage you to add those to your quick access toolbar. So now that we've aligned those, we now have these text boxes. And I can see here that these aren't particularly aligned. So point 1 looks like it's kind of aligned. Point 2 is not too bad, but point 3 is definitely a bit too high. And point 4 is a little bit too high as well. So essentially, I want these text boxes to be kind of in the center of their related icon. So a way that I can do that is I'm going to select this object, hold down Shift, select, and then I'm going to align these objects to the middle. And I'm going to do the same for all of these. So I'm just going to hold down Shift, align to middle, and you can see very slight movements as I'm doing this. And align to middle, just to line those up. So now I have equal spacing and everything is all nicely lined up. Then, of course, if I wanted this whole lot centered on this particular slide, I could select everything. So I'm just going to draw a big rectangle to select all of the objects. I can group them together, Control-G to make them one object, and then I can align to the center to move that across. So very quickly, with a few clicks, I've been able to get my alignment exactly correct. And this is the way that you should be aligning objects, either on the slide or relative to one another. All you need to remember is where those arrange options are, and also a few keyboard shortcuts when it comes to grouping. Now, if you're interested, if you need to ungroup objects, you can do Control-Shift-G, which will ungroup all of those objects. All right, so reasonably straightforward. Let's move on to slide number 3 and take a look what we've got going on over here. So this is still kind of on that subject of grouping, aligning, and positioning, but we're going to move our knowledge forward a little bit now. Now, another thing you have when it comes to aligning and positioning things on a slide, if you right-click your mouse and go down to Grids and Guides, you'll get this little menu pop out to the side. And I would recommend when you're working in PowerPoint, always make sure you have Smart Guides ticked, because that's going to help you when it comes to aligning things on your slide as well. So for example, if I click on this middle circle and I pick it up, can you see as I move it, I'm getting those little guidelines, which is kind of giving me an idea of when I'm in the middle and where I am in relation to other objects in the page. So sometimes this can really help when it comes to aligning things as well. So don't forget about that, available in the right-click menu. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select all of these objects, or these circles, I should say, like so. Now, if I jump up to the Shape Format ribbon, you'll see as soon as you select a shape, you're going to get the contextual ribbon come up. What you also have in here is the selection pane. Now, I find the selection pane really useful. What it basically does is it lists out all of the different objects that you have on your slide. And when you add something new, so if I was to add another shape onto this slide, PowerPoint's going to give it its own generic name for that particular object. And you can see here I have the rather generic text box 1, rectangle 4, so on and so forth. So what I like to do when I'm using the selection pane is I like to give these meaningful names so I can easily identify my objects. So for example, if I click on text box 1, you can see it highlight in the slide what that's referring to. In this case, it's just the heading, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. If I go to text box 3, this is the title. So I'm going to double click and you can see that I can rename it to title and hit enter. Next one, text box 23, I can see what that is, so I can double click and I'm going to say this is DS for Darius Stone. And I'm going to say that that is text. 22 is the text for Lucy Moore, so I'm going to give that a name. And I'm just going to go through and make these a little bit more meaningful. So this one here is oval number 1, as far as I'm concerned. So let's call it that. Then we have oval number 2. And you can name these whatever you like, but this one is the text box for Mark Parker. So I'm going to say MP text. Then finally, we have oval number 3. And of course, you can give yours more meaningful names than I've done here. But now, by looking at these different objects, they're a lot easier for me to identify. And what I can do from the selection pane is that I can make selections from here as opposed to clicking or dragging a box around them. So if I want to select all of these oval shapes, I can click on oval 1, hold down Control, select oval 2, and oval 3. Now, this is particularly useful, this method, if you have a lot of objects, particularly if they overlap each other, because when objects are placed on top of each other, it's quite difficult to get your mouse in there and select them all. So I like to use this method. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump up to Align, and I'm going to say Distribute horizontally to make those a little bit more even. Then what I might do is Control G to group them all, and then I'm going to center these on the page by using Align Center. Once I've done that, I'm going to Control Shift G just to ungroup them, because now I have to deal with the alignment of the labels underneath. So again, I'm going to hold down Shift and select all of these text boxes, and I'm going to choose Align Objects Middle, just to pull those in line with each other. Now, technically, what I want here is I want the text for Mark Parker, CEO, to be in the middle of the circle above, and the same for Lucy Moore, and the same for Darius. Okay, so I need to select both of these objects, and then I can align to center. Let's do it for this one as well. To select them both, align to center, and the final one, select both, align to center. Okay, so very quickly, everything is now looking nice and lined up. Another important thing to note is with this title here, so where it says Meet the Management Team, and I'm actually just going to change these to capital letters just to make that a little bit nicer to read. Now, if I wanted this title in the middle of all of these objects, if I was to select this placeholder, go to the Home ribbon and Center Align, it's only going to align the text within that placeholder. So that's not actually what I want to do. What I can do is drag the text box so that it meets the edges of the slide. And then when I center align, I know that that text is going to be dead in the middle. And you'll find that come up quite often when you've added text boxes in and things like that. If you want to center them, make sure you make them the full width of the slide. Okay, and let's just make that title slightly bigger. So a few tips and tricks there. I've spent a little bit longer on that because it is so important and one of my #1 bugbears when it comes to presentations looking unprofessional. Let's change gears a bit now and move on to the next thing. This is one of my favorite things to do, and this is filling objects with pictures. And this is something else that I see frequently in PowerPoint presentations that gives them a really unprofessional look. And that is, people tend to put images into a presentation and then they tend to stretch them or squish them up. And that usually happens because they've put the image in and it hasn't quite fit the slide or whatever object they're trying to place it into. So let me show you a quick example. I'm going to add a new blank slide and I'm going to insert a picture onto this slide. So up to insert, down to picture, and I have a picture saved off onto my PC that I'm going to use. And it's this picture just here. I'm going to click insert. So it's inserted this picture in and it looks fine at the moment, but you see that I have some blank space running down the left or right hand side. So what I find people will often do in this scenario is they will click on the picture and then they will use the resize handle, drag it out to fill that white space. And I've seen a lot more extreme examples than what I'm showing you here. This picture, it still looks pretty okay. It is slightly stretched, but I could probably get away with it. But you'll find a lot of the time you'll see images which are very clearly stretched and things start to distort. And that's because people don't understand how you can insert a picture and the correct way, essentially, using crop and fill. So I'm going to show you this again. I'm going to Control Z just to take it back to how it was. So in this scenario, what I would do to fill this space without stretching this picture in any way, shape or form is that on the Picture Format tab, I would use the Crop and the Fill option. Now, when you select Fill, you're going to see these little black guidelines or handles around the outside of your picture. And you use those handles to drag and fill whatever space it is you need to fill. So I'm going to drag those out like so. You then go back to Crop and select Fill. And what it does is instead of stretching the image, it zooms in. So it's keeping the aspect ratio, but it's filling the page. And once you're happy with it, click on the Crop button, and there you have a perfect image that takes up the entire space. So the Crop and Fill utility is such an important tool to know and use when you're dealing with images. Okay. Now, let me show you this in a business example. So we're going to jump back to this page, this slide, I should say. So in this example, I have some circles again, and I want to fill in the pictures of each of these team leaders. So I've done the first one already. This is Mark Parker, the CEO, and I want to do the same for Lucy and Darius, but I don't want these images to appear stretched or squished. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing is you need to make sure that you have your pictures downloaded. I have a couple of pictures that I'm going to use, and later on in the course, I'm going to show you exactly where I get all of the images that I'm using in this presentation. So I have my image saved off. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to Format Shape. And you want to expand the Fill option just here because we're going to fill this shape with a picture. So I'm going to select Picture or Texture Fill. Now what it will do is it will fill with the last image that you used. And for me, that was this image. Now I want to use a different image. So I'm going to say Insert from File, and I'm going to select the picture that I want to use, and it's this one just here. And there we go. So it's now inserted the picture, but again, it looks a little bit off. So I'm going to use that Crop and Fill utility again. I'm going to jump up to Picture Format. We're going to go into Crop and we're going to say Fill. And look what it does. So now what I can do is I can resize this picture and move it into the position that I want. Now, in general, if you're doing something like this, you kind of want everybody to look as if they're the same kind of size in your image. So I'm going to make this a bit bigger. I'm going to move Lucy down a little bit, and yeah, she's kind of looking a reasonably similar size to Mark Parker. Once you've done that, we just click the Crop button and it crops that image perfectly. I can then do the same. I can right click, go to Format Shape, picture or texture fill. It's filled it with the last image that I've used, but I can go to Insert, select the image that I want to use. So let's use this guy this time. Sometimes you have to wait a few seconds for it to load. And this is a pretty good example. You can see there, it's very squished up. It really doesn't look right. So again, up to picture format, crop, fill. And then you can make your adjustments. So I'm going to make it larger so that he's kind of the same size as the other two, like so. Pretty happy with that. Click on crop, and there we have a perfectly cropped picture. So crop and fill, something that you really need to know if you work with a lot of images in your PowerPoint presentations. Let's move on. Now, this is a little hack that I use all the time, and it's the eyedropper tool. And this is a great little tool that's available in PowerPoint and in fact all of the other Microsoft applications as well, that really helps if you're trying to keep a consistent color scheme across different elements of your presentation. And what it allows you to do is pick up colors from your presentation and use them in other places. So for example, on this slide, I have quite a lot of different colors going on here. And it might be that I want to change the color of this title text to make it a little bit more interesting. So what I would normally do is highlight the text, jump up to the home ribbon, and then select a color from the palette just here. And I might go in and decide, yes, yellow looks nice, and change it to that color. But if you always do this, you tend to have a presentation that has all these different random colors going on and nothing really matches. So the presentation becomes not very cohesive in its color scheme. So a much better way is to use a color that's already within the presentation. And you can do that by selecting the eyedropper text fill. So as soon as I click that, you see that my icon changes to this little, I think we call those pipettes, if I remember back to school. And when you hover over part of your slide, it shows you the color that's going to be applied to your selected text when you click. So I can essentially pick up any color in this presentation to apply it to that text. So I'm going to go for a light color. I'm going to use this light kind of lavender. Click. And you can now see that the color of that text has changed. And it instantly has a lot more cohesive feel because I'm using colors already contained within the presentation. It's really good for consistency. So that little eyedropper tool is really great. Now, a question that I've been asked before about this eyedropper tool is, what about if there's a color on a different slide that you want to use? Because when you select eyedropper, it only allows you to select colors on the current slide. But it might be there's a color on this particular slide that I want to use over here. So I'm going to show you a little workaround. This is the only workaround that I've found for this. If anybody knows a different way of doing it, then I would love to hear it. But let me just show you in case that is something that you want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump across to here, and maybe I want to use a color from this background. So I'm going to select a piece of text. So I'm going to select his surname. I'm going to go up to eyedropper, and I'm going to choose a color from this background. So I'm going to do like this orange color just here and click. Now what you'll see immediately is it changes the color of this piece of text. So all I'm going to do here is just change that back to how it was. But now when I go back to this slide, if I want to make this word that color, I can select it, and you'll find it underneath recent colors. It's going to be the first one in the list. I can click, and there we go. So that is my little workaround for utilizing that eyedropper tool to pick up colors that are on different slides. Really great little feature. All right, let's move on to something else. Now, I'm going to show you how to replace all fonts within your presentation. So this is particularly good if you've received a presentation that has lots of different fonts in it, or maybe you've copied a slide from an old presentation that you did into a new presentation, and you want to make the fonts consistent. You want everything to match and have the same font. So instead of going through each slide and changing the font, you can do this all in one go. So what you'll see, if we choose this slide, if I click in some text and look at the font that's currently in use, I can see that I'm using Futura Round. So if I want to replace all of the Futura Round font in this particular presentation, I can do that by jumping across to the Replace option, and you can see we have Replace Fonts. Now, in the Replace drop-down, it's going to show you all of the fonts that are currently in use in your presentation. So you can go through and select which one you want to replace. So for me, that's Futura Round. And then you can choose what you want to replace it with. And you can see you have the full list of fonts in here. Now, the one that I'm going to choose is, let's scroll down. I'm going to choose this one just here, Lato Light. Select it, click on Replace, and it's replaced all of those fonts across my presentation. So again, a quick way of making your presentations consistent. So don't forget about that little option. All right, moving down. Now we get onto something that is pretty exciting. And this is really one of those things that can take your presentation from being a standard, boring, moving from slide to slide into something that really knocks people's socks off. Now, I'm sure you've all been used to using animation in your PowerPoint presentations, but now we have a new transition called morph. And I say new, it was released in, I think it was the 2016 version of PowerPoint. So if you're using 2016 or Office 365 or even 2019, on the transitions ribbon, you should see this transition just here. It's called morph. And what morph allows you to do is it adds animation essentially to your presentation. It allows you to zoom in, zoom out, and also pan around. And it has a really smooth, nice effect. So I want to show you a quick example. I'm going to run this presentation. And you can see that I have a map. So maybe this is a map showing all of the office locations and where they are. And when I move on to the next slide, look what happens. It zooms into Florida. So maybe if in my presentation I'm talking about all of the offices, giving a general overview, then I want to focus on Florida, I can have that zoom in effect, which is just really, really nice and slick. So let me show you how I created this. Now I'm going to delete out this slide first of all. And this was very straightforward. The first thing I did was duplicated this slide. Now, a quick way of duplicating a slide is the keyboard shortcut Control-D. So now I have a copy. What I then did is I want to remove all of these pins because I'm just zooming into Florida. I don't really need these pins everywhere. So I'm going to select one of them. And a quicker way of doing this is to jump up to your graphics format ribbon and pull up that selection pane again. Now, even though I haven't given these a meaningful name, I can see that all of the pins are kind of called graphic 28, 27, so on and so forth. So I can go through and select all of the pins by holding down my control key, and then I can just press delete to delete all of those out in one go. So now what I want to do is I want to do the zoom in. Now, the way that I find easiest for this is I need to zoom out a little bit on my presentation, and I'm just using the slider in the bottom corner. Because what I want to do is click on this image, and then I'm going to drag it out and make it super huge. And this does look a little bit strange because it kind of goes off the edge of the slide. Now, look at the thumbnail for this. If you want to get an idea of what you're actually going to see on the slide, you need to look at that thumbnail. I might make that a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. So I'm just interested in Florida, so I'm going to move this around. And if I want to go even bigger, I might want to zoom out so it's a bit easier and drag it a bit more and position like so. So I can see in the thumbnail what that's going to look like. I'm pretty happy with that. And then what I need to do is select both of these slides and apply the morph transition. Okay, and that is pretty much it. If we run that again, it should have the effect that we're looking for, like so. Now I could take this on a little bit further. If I duplicate this slide again, Control-D, It might be that I want to talk about Florida and then I want to talk about Texas. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to move it across. And this kind of gives a panning effect. So I'm happy with how that's looking. I want to make sure I have my morph transition applied. And then now, when I run the presentation, I should get that zoom in effect. And then when I go to the next slide, I'm kind of getting a panning effect moving across. So it's a really effective way of moving between your slides. If I wanted it then to pop back out to the main map, I could duplicate the slide, drag it down underneath, make sure that I have the morph transition applied. And then if we run the whole thing from the beginning again, we're going to zoom into Florida. We're going to pan across to Texas. And then we're going to zoom back out to the main map. So you can really choose to punctuate, highlight what you're actually saying at that particular time with clever use of the morph transition. So I really love this, and definitely something worth playing around with. Now I'm going to show you another example of this, but in a business context. So let's go back to this slide and let's just run it and see what this looks like when it's got a morph transition applied. So again, it might be that I'm talking about the management team. I then want to focus just on Mark Parker. So when I move to the next slide with the morph transition applied, the other two people get minimized down, and then I just have my information there about Mark Parker. I move on to the next slide. I'm then talking about Lucy Moore. All right, so again, very simple to recreate, and I'll just very quickly show you how I did this. All I did was duplicate the slide. And then I replace the images. So I want this one to be Darius. So I want this little image down here to be the same size as this one. So I'm going to jump up to picture format and just check the size that I have. And in this end group, you can see the height and the width. So 458. So I'm going to select Darius and just change to 458. So I know that that is exactly the same size. I'm then going to make Lucy as big as this one down here, which is 1.12. So we're going to 1.12, hit enter, and also the width 1.12, hit enter. And then I just need to place my object. So I want her to go down there. I want Darius to be the main focus of attention. And then of course I would go in and I would change the text here. We'll just say Darius Stone, head of HR. And then I need to make sure that I have that morph transition applied. And you'll see also at the end, I've put that slide again. And if I apply the morph transition, it means it's going to go back to the original slide. So let's play the whole lot together. Like so. So we're going to go talk about Mark Parker. We're then going to talk about Lucy. We're then going to talk about Darius. And then we're going to go back to that main slide. So hopefully you can see how simple and how nice that effect is. Definitely something that you should think about incorporating if you really want to produce a modern looking, fresh presentation. Morph transition. Excellent. We like that one. Moving down. The next thing I want to talk to you about, again, is another newish feature in PowerPoint, and that is slide zoom. And this is really a really cool way of moving between different slides or sections in your presentation in kind of a choose your own story way. If anybody remembers back to when they were younger, maybe I'm the only one who used to have those choose your own story books where you could choose which way you wanted to go through your story. And this is a similar kind of thing. It basically allows the viewer or whoever's looking at this presentation to choose how they want to go through the presentation. So it makes PowerPoint less of a linear application where you're just moving from slide to slide. People can dip into a certain strand and go down that strand, come back to the beginning, maybe explore another strand. And this is what slide zoom can help with. So let me show you an example. I'm going to run this presentation. And you can see here we just have the head of the Florida office, Mr. Cameron Bryce, just there. We have a quote from him, and then underneath, people can select how they want to progress through this presentation depending on what interests them. So it might be that I'm particularly interested in finding out about the team. So I could click here, and it's going to zoom me into that slide. I might have another option up here which will allow me to go off in a different direction. So this kind of works more it's like more like a mind map as opposed to moving through PowerPoint in a linear fashion. Now for this one, if I click, it just jumps me back out to where I was, and I can then jump in and explore the other strand. So this is a really cool way of moving through presentations that is very un-PowerPointy, is what I like to say. So let's take a look at how I created this. Now I'm going to delete out the zooms just here, because the first thing that you need to do is you need to create the slides that you want to zoom into. So you can see here I've already created the chart and the Our Team slide. So once you've created the slides, you can then go back to your main slide, jump up to Insert, and in the Links group, you have a Zoom drop-down. And this is where you can select Slide Zoom. And it's a simple case of selecting the slides you want to use. So for me, it's 17 and 18. Clicking on Insert, and I can then position those wherever I want. So I want them down here. This one's a little bit big, so I'm just going to resize it. And I'm going to pull this one over, and I'm going to resize that down again and just position them however you want. Now, when I'm clicked on these zooms, you'll see that you also get a contextual ribbon called Zoom. So this has all of the options for these particular slide zooms. So one thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to give my slide zooms a border, just so it matches the presentation and they stand out a little bit from the background. Now, another little option that I have in here that I want to make sure that I've got turned on is this option in the Zoom options group, Return to Zoom. If you have this selected, when someone zooms into a slide, when they click again, it's going to zoom them back out to the main slide. So if you want that kind of thing to happen, if you want them to always come back to here before they select a different path to go down, then make sure you have Return to Zoom selected for all of your Zoom slides. Once you've done that, that should give you the effect that you're looking for. So I can then zoom in, click again, and it's going to zoom me back out. So a nice little way of thinking about PowerPoint in a different way. So that is slide zoom. Now we're going to revisit this in a few minutes because we're going to do something a bit similar to this. We're going to do a section zoom in a moment, but before we get to that, we need to add sections into our presentation. And this is my next little tip, something that I see people do very rarely. And this is particularly important if you have a very long presentation. It helps give structure to the presentation and it also makes it appear more organized. So for example, if someone sends you a 75 slide presentation and maybe you need to review just a specific section, it's good to have your presentation split up into sections because you can tell people which section they need to focus on. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to add sections into the presentation. So I'm going to click on my first slide, up on the home ribbon, section, add section. You can see at the top it says Untitled, and I'm going to call this section Introduction and rename it. I'm going to say that I want this slide and this slide in the introduction, but I'm going to click on slide 3, add another section, and this one's going to be called Meet the Team and rename. Let's scroll down and I'm going to click on slide 7. Let's add another section called Locations. Let's scroll down a bit more to, where should we go to? Let's go to here. Add another section called Florida Office. And then we're going to get down to towards the end. I'm going to add a final section, which I'm just going to call Close. So very quickly, I've added in these sections and you can see that they are collapsible and expandable. So again, if you're working with a team of people on a presentation, you might decide to assign a different section to a different person. So what that person can then do is collapse up everything else that they're not interested in and just focus on the slides that they need to modify, change, or update. So it's a great way of removing the noise. Makes large presentations a lot easier to organize and manage. Now, another cool thing you can do is section zooms. So if you have sections, you can essentially create a really nice, I like to call it a table of contents, and again, let people choose which sections they want to view first. So what I'm going to do is right at the top is I'm going to add in a new blank slide. I'm just going to place that at the top here. And then I'm going to add a section, and I'm going to call this table of contents, like so. Now, I want these two slides to still be underneath introduction. So I'm going to select these two slides and I'm going to drag and drop them so that they're underneath introduction. I then want table of contents to be at the beginning. So I'm going to click it, drag, and you can see how easy it is to reorder your sections. Now what I can do on this table of contents page is go back to Insert, across to Zoom, and this time I can use Section Zoom. And that's going to show me all of the different sections in my presentation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert 4 of them. So I'm going to select these 4 sections and click on Insert. I can then organize these however I want on my page. So let's just do, again, you can use your alignment tools to make these a lot neater. I'm just going to do this quite roughly. And something else I might want to do is select them all and again use my zoom ribbon and add a zoom border so they stand out a little bit from the background. But effectively what these do is allow me to zoom in to different sections. So let's run the presentation. And if I want to jump into this section, I can click it. It's going to jump me in and it's going to let me run through all of the slides within that section before jumping me back out to the table of contents. So again, this is another way of letting people essentially choose their own path through a presentation based on what they're most interested in or what's relevant to them. It's a very different way of thinking about PowerPoint presentations because you're moving away from that linear model. All right, so sections and section zooms. So moving into our last few points. Now, this next little tip is related to actually presenting a slide deck as opposed to the design of it. So when you're presenting, and I'm just going to select this slide here and jump into slideshow. Sometimes, particularly if you're presenting in a large room to a lot of people, sometimes it's quite hard for people to see a white cursor on a white background. Particularly if they're sitting right in the back row and you're using your cursor to kind of point at things, they might find that a bit difficult to see. So if you right click your mouse, you have pointer options and I can change to a laser pointer, which instantly makes it a lot easier for people to see exactly where I am on the slide, what I'm pointing at, what I'm trying to emphasize. When you right click and go back to pointer options, you also have the option of selecting a pen. Now, I am terrible at using the pen with a mouse, but you can circle different things. You also have the pointer option of a highlighter if you want to highlight anything particular in the presentation. And of course, if you right click, you have the option to erase all ink on the slide. Now, a quick way of cycling through these things, because sometimes if you're in the middle of a presentation, you don't want to be right-clicking, going to your pointer options and selecting an option. There are shortcut keys. So for example, if I want to switch to my laser pointer, I can just press Ctrl L. If I want to switch to my pen, Ctrl P. If I want to switch to that highlighter, Ctrl I. And if I just want to go back to a regular mouse, Ctrl A is going to take me back to my regular mouse pointer. Another way of temporarily activating the laser pointer, if you just want to use it maybe just to demonstrate something once, if you hold down the control key on your keyboard and click, you get a temporary pointer. As soon as you let go of the mouse, it disappears. Control click again to bring it back. So these are really useful little tips if you're presenting to a large audience, or even if you're doing a presentation on a Zoom meeting or online. The final thing I'm going to talk about here when it comes to presenting is if you want to focus everyone's attention on you and what you're saying and completely remove the presentation behind you, you can press B to black it out. So everybody's attention is now on you, what you're saying. They're not staring at the presentation behind you. Press B again to bring it back. Alternatively, if you prefer a white background, you can do W to white everything out, W again to bring your presentation back. So some really nice little shortcuts there, which will help you when you're presenting content. All right. The final few points, we've got about 5 minutes left. I've got a couple of other points that I want to cover with you. And I'm actually going to switch back to the presentation I started out with originally, because I want to show you this last slide. And I hope you can see this. I am aware that this requires a reasonably decent internet connection, but hopefully most of you are seeing here that I actually have a video playing in the background of this slide. And again, this is a really good way of making your presentations a little bit more interesting and engaging. I don't have a static image, I have a little video playing. Now, this is super simple to do. Again, the video that I've used is available in one of the resources that I'm going to show you at the end of this course, but you could still have a static image as opposed to a video. What you also might notice is that I have a kind of transparency over the top, so that even though I have a video in the background, the text on top still stands out. So let me show you very quickly how I created this. I'm going to come out of there. Let's jump back to our presentation. And I'm just going to click here and insert a new blank slide. So what I did here was I downloaded a little video from a free video website that I'm going to show you in a moment. I've saved it off to my local drives. So now all I need to do is go up to Insert. In the final group here, I can insert a video from my PC. And it's this one just here. And there we go. So I can choose to play it, so I can check what that's going to look like. And again, I apologize if this is a bit jumpy, if you have, if your internet connection is not great. I can check that video. I'm going to jump up to my playback ribbon, and I'm going to say that I want this video to loop around because it's only a few seconds long. I want it to loop around until I move on to the next slide. And then all I've done to make this a bit more transparent is I've inserted a shape over the top. So I've chosen a rectangle. I've drawn a big old rectangle over the top of the video, and then I've changed that shape fill. So you can choose whatever color you like. I'm going to go with a blue. I'm going to say I don't want an outline. And then I've just done a right click and changed the transparency of the shape to either let through less or more of that video. And this is great if you plan to layer text over the top, because the last thing you want is a video that distracts away from the actual text. So I'm going to just let a little bit of that video sneak through. I can then go and put my text over the top. So I'm going to insert a text box, which I might want to say, let's just say, thank you. And of course, you can format that in any way you see fit. So I'm going to make that white. I'm going to change it to, let's do my favorite Lato font. I'm going to make it quite a bit bigger. And of course, I'm going to do my old trick of dragging this out to the bounds of the slide and centering. And then when I play it very quickly, you'll see that's the kind of effect that you get in a few clicks. Really, really nice. And of course, you can do a similar thing with images. So if I jump back up to this slide where we had an image, If I wanted to have text running over the top of this, again, I'm a big fan of doing this, adding a transparent rectangle over the top. Again, selecting the color that I want. So maybe I'm just going to have, let's have this blue-gray color. Right click and just adjusting the transparency. It gives me more control over how much of that image I'm seeing through that rectangle. Hopefully that's given you a few little tips and tricks there. I'm going to move down just to show you this in action in a slide like this. So for example, I've used a lot of the techniques that I've run through in this particular slide, and I think it makes it really interesting. It looks modern, it looks slick. I've got a static image in the background with a transparent rectangle over the top. I've got really nice modern fonts. And then I've utilized icons, which are available in PowerPoint. I've utilized a circle shape, which just has no fill. And I've utilized minimal animation so that it's not overwhelming, okay? So again, let's just run through some of these points. Choosing clear, compatible fonts. These fonts are of the same family, but you can see I've switched between using uppercase and lowercase just so everything doesn't look too uniform and too boring. I've used large background images and transparent shapes. I've used iconography. Character spacing. It's always nice to play around with character spacing. I've made the spacing between each character in the word a little bit wider. Thoughtful animation. So animation that adds to the presentation as opposed to detracting. And also good use of color. Again, hope this is showing up for you, but these three headings are very slightly different colors. And I've used the eyedropper tool to pick up colors from the image so that everything looks cohesive and tied together. Lovely. Now, the final thing, if we move on to the last slide here. This is resources. So this is where you can get all of the images that I've used in this presentation. Now, when it comes to things like high quality imagery and also videos, Pexels and Unsplash are websites that I use all the time. All of the images on there you can just download and use for free in any presentation. If you're looking for icons, then PowerPoint has its own selection of icons. But if you're looking for thousands of different icons to use in presentations for free, then the Noun project allows you to set up a free account and download icons from there. And if you're looking for things like slide templates, then these two sites are good for those free resources as well. And I just want to end by just jumping into Pexels just to show you how simple it is. So if we jump back to Pexels, so pexels.com, when you open it up, it looks like this. You can pretty much search for anything you like. So if I go to search for landscape and hit enter, it's going to pull back all of these really high quality images that you can use in your presentations. If you're looking for videos, if you look at the top, currently I'm clicked on photos, but if I want videos like the ones that I showed you in the presentation, I can filter by videos and you can see you just get a few short little videos that look really nice in the background of your presentations. And all you do is click free download, it will download it to your local drives and you can then just insert it into your presentation. So this is pretty much what I use when I'm creating really nice looking PowerPoint presentations. So that is pretty much it. I think we had more than 10 tips there, but hopefully you can see, as I said, you don't really need to be a designer. I always start out with an image in the background, I apply my transparencies, I add in some icons, and then I tend to think about the colors that I'm using and also my fonts. And more often than not, I can put together something that looks really effective and really different to other presentations that are out there. Quite often, a lot of the presentations you'll come across aren't particularly great. So follow these steps and you should end up with something that looks super cool. And that is it. So let's take a look at today's agenda. So quite a lot on the agenda today, but these aren't long tips. They're fairly short, but really, really useful. I'm going to start out by talking to you a little bit about the crop and fill tool, because this is something that I see people doing wrong all the time when they're using PowerPoint. I'm going to show you how you can use it to properly resize images so that you don't get distortion, they don't end up stretched, things like that. I'm going to talk to you about transparent overlays, and I'll explain more about that when we get to it. And then we're going to go into all the different ways that you can select objects on your slide, and also how you can align objects using the selection pane and other methods, because nothing makes your PowerPoint presentation look unprofessional than objects that aren't correctly aligned. So we want to make sure we're doing that correctly. I'm going to show you how you can do things like fill shapes with pictures the right way, and we're going to take a look at a couple of examples before moving into one of the newer features of PowerPoint, which is the morph transition. So morph is really cool. If you haven't used it yet, I'm going to show you how that works. And I'm also going to show you the advanced morph transition, which very few people know exists. So you're going to get a bit of a heads up there. We're going to talk about merging shapes. I'm going to show you some cool effects that you can get. I'm going to show you how you can keep your presentations, the color in your presentations, consistent by using the eyedropper tool, and something that's really useful, just a blanket replace of all the fonts in your presentation. Excellent if you get a presentation from a client who uses a different font and you just want to replace it with your own organization's branded font. Really simple. I'm going to show you how you can set a default shape and also use, again, one of the newer features in PowerPoint, and that is slide and summary zoom. That's really going to help you take your presentations to the next level. We're then going to move on to talking about PowerPoint add-ins. I'm going to show you a couple of useful things that you might want to consider adding to extend the capabilities of PowerPoint. I'm going to show you how you can remove backgrounds from images so that you kind of working with PowerPoint a little bit like Photoshop. Obviously not as powerful, but it has that same effect. I'm going to show you how you can set up custom slideshows, and I'm going to give you a real-world example as to why that's useful. I'm going to show you how to insert QR codes. These days we're using QR codes for everything, so why not use them in PowerPoint as well? Really nice, quick and simple. And then finally, we're going to talk about slideshow settings. So quite a lot to cover today. I hope there's some things in there which pique your interest. So let's come out of here and switch across to our other presentation. Now, I did drop the presentation into the chat panel, so now would be a great time to open it up. And come on, am I opening the correct one? That is the question. No, I'm not. I should learn to name my files different things. There we go. All right, guys, let's start out with crop and fill. This is hack number 1, and this is something that I use all the time. And when I discovered this, I was like, oh, that's how you do it, because it was a bit of a mystery before. Now, if you have a blank PowerPoint slide, a lot of the time you might want to fill the background of this slide with maybe an image. And throughout this session, I'm also going to show you where I go for free resources. So for things like images, icons, videos, things like that. Now, the best place to go to if you want some high quality images to use in your presentation is a website called pexels.com. So let's quickly bring it up. I'll just very quickly show you what this looks like, because again, this is one of those sites that I come to all the time. So I'm going to show you the links at the end. I've included a slide with all of these links if you want to go back and look at those links and set these up in your browser. But Pexels is a website. You can use any of the photos or any of the videos on this site for free in any of your presentations. And that is for professional and personal use. So it's a really straightforward website. All you need to do is type in what you're looking for. If I'm looking for a landscape image, it brings them up, and they're really, really stunning images. And it's really nice that you can use these for free. So if I want to download an image, I can click on the image and I have free download in the top right-hand corner. That's going to download to your downloads folder on your PC, and then you're free to use that in PowerPoint or wherever else you need to use it. Now, I've already downloaded this image to a folder, and we're going to use this on our first slide. So let's minimize this down and go back to PowerPoint. Let's jump up to Insert. I'm going to insert this, and I basically want it to be the background of my slide. Now, take a look what happens when I insert this image. I'm going to insert it from this device. It's this one just here. Let's click on Insert. Now, you'll notice that this a lot of the time when you insert an image, it has this gap down the side. So we have this white space running down either side of this image. And what I see people doing all the time when they're working in PowerPoint is they'll go, okay, and they'll use the resize handles to drag the image out like that so that it fills the entire background. Now, for this particular image, it's not too bad. We could probably get away with it. But for a lot of images, when you do that, they become stretched, distorted, and they look really unprofessional. So let me show you how to do this the correct way, because this is a bit of a revelation if you've never used it before. Now, I'm going to Control Z a couple of times just to take it back to how it was. What you want to be doing to perfectly resize this is going up to your Picture Format tab, and then in the size group, click the lower half of the crop button and select Fill. Now, as soon as you do that, notice that you get these black handles around the outside of the image. So all you need to do is drag these handles out to fill that white space. So I'm going to drag them out like that. If you have maybe something like a company footer running across the bottom and you don't want this image to overlap it, you could also drag it up so that you can still see your company footer. Now, I don't have one, so let's just drag it back down again. Once you've kind of scoped out the size, all you need to do then is go back to that crop button and choose Fill again. And what it does is it basically zooms into the image so it doesn't distort it. You can then make finer adjustments by moving it up and down and getting it in the exact correct position, and then just click the top half of that crop button and you have a perfectly cropped image that isn't stretched or distorted. So that is one of my biggest tips. As I said, I use this all the time to make sure that my images look professional. So that is hack number one, that crop and fill button. And this is going to come up again a bit later on when we take a look at how we fill shapes with images as well. Now we have this background. The problem that you sometimes have when you're using an image as a background is that if you want to put text over the top of this, so let's imagine that this is maybe an intro slide, the title slide. If I want to put text over the top of this, because this background image is quite contrasty, and what I mean by that is there are parts of it that are white and there are parts of it that are darker, a lot of the time, if you choose black font, it might blend into the background too much. If I choose white font, it might also blend into the background too much. You don't want that background image to really overtake the text on the slide. Now, there are a couple of ways that you can get around this. Now, you could select the image, go up to Picture Format, and maybe use this transparency option just here to take the transparency of the image down. And that's perfectly legitimate. If that works for you, that's absolutely fine. This isn't the method that I like to use for a couple of different reasons. Now, the first reason would be I have absolutely no control over the color of this transparency. It's always going to be that kind of white haze over the top. If I want to control the color, I prefer to use a different method. The other reason I don't like doing this is because I'm kind of stuck to the transparencies that I can see just here. I want to be able to granularly modify that transparency myself. So the way that I prefer to do this is by using what I like to call a transparent overlay. And I have no idea if that is a technical term in PowerPoint. It's just what I call it. And what I mean by that is simply inserting a shape over the top. So we're going to go up to Insert. We're going to go to Shapes, and I'm going to grab the Rectangle tool. And we're just going to drag a big old rectangle over that image in the background. Now, if we go up to Shape Format, I want to make sure that I don't have an outline around the outside. But what I can now do is I can choose the color of this rectangle, and I can also control the transparency. Now we can do that through the right-click menu. If we go down to Format Shape, we're going to get our Format Shape pane open up on the right-hand side. And when we expand Fill, right down here, we can choose what color we want to use, and we can also control the transparency. So I'm going to choose a blue that's slightly darker. Let's go for this one just here. And then I can use this slider to either let less or more of that picture through. So if I just kind of want a hint of that background poking through and I want to make sure that my text on top really stands out, I might choose to sort of put it to that kind of level, like so. And that gives you just so much more control than adjusting the transparency of the actual image behind. So now that I have this on top, I want to add my text. So let's jump up to Insert. We're going to draw ourselves a text box. Now this is another tip I have, a very simple tip. You might already be doing this, but if I want to make sure that the title is exactly in the middle, I always make sure that I drag my text box so that it meets the edges of the slide. And then any text that I align within here is going to be exactly in the middle. So I want to add the text, let's say PowerPoint hacks for 2022. Let's select the text box. I'm going to change the font. I'm going to use my favorite font, which is Lato Black. I love this font for titles. I'm going to change it to white, and let's make this quite a bit larger. Let's take that up to 48. So now if I align to the center, I know that it's exactly in the center of the slide. Center running horizontally as opposed to vertically. So that is how I like to add my titles into my slide. Now, if I want to add a subtitle here, in general, what I tend to do, instead of drawing another text box, I'll just duplicate the text box and then edit it. A shortcut key for duplicating anything in PowerPoint is Control D. That's going to give me another text box with exactly the same thing in. Now, if I want to line this up again, this text box, if I want to line it up with the edges of the slide, I can make granular changes by using my arrow keys. So I can just nudge it across until I get it exactly perfect. And I can then nudge it up until it's underneath that main title. What I'm going to do here is we're going to make some changes. We're going to change the font to, let's go for Lato this time, not Lato Black. And we're going to make it quite a bit smaller. Let's take that to 24 points. And now I have quite a nice subheading. Now, when it comes to using fonts in your presentation, another little tip here, try not to use too many different types of font. I've seen presentations where people have about 5 or 6 different fonts that they're using. And again, it sort of doesn't really lend itself to having a consistent looking presentation. You want to kind of really stick to maybe 2 or 3 fonts that work really well together. So in general, when I'm using fonts in PowerPoint, I tend to stick to fonts that are of the same family. For example, on this title slide, my main title is using Lato Black, whereas my subtitle is just using Lato. So it's the same family, but a slightly different font. And this brings me on to the subject of another one of my favorite websites, another free resource. And that is a website which will allow you to take a look at different font combinations that work really well together. So let's go back and quickly take a look at it. I have this set up as a link, I think. Yes, it's this one here. It's called Font Joy. As I said, there is a slide at the end of this presentation which has all of the URLs if you want to set these up as shortcut links. And what this does is it will show you pairings of font that work really well together. If you want to move on to the next one, you can just click Generate and it will show you a couple more pairings. And you can see the font names at the side here. So these are the different pairings for titles, subtitles, and then body text. And you can carry on just clicking Generate to take a look at different font pairings. So if you're ever stuck to know sort of what fonts go together, that is a great website to have in your arsenal. So that is hack number 2, transparent overlays, I should say. Let's move on to hack number 3, and this is selection and alignment when you're working in PowerPoint. Now, this is some basic stuff, but you would be surprised how many people don't do this correctly. And when you have things that aren't aligned correctly in a PowerPoint presentation, it really makes your presentation look unprofessional, even if things are just very slightly off. So we want to make sure that we have all of the tools that we need for aligning and selecting things in our presentation. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start out by drawing a few shapes. Now I'm just going to grab the oval tool, and another quick tip which you may be aware of, if you start to draw a shape, notice that I can draw an oval. If I want a circle, remember to hold down Shift as you're dragging. So let's do that again. Let's go to Shapes, select Oval. If I want an exact circle, hold down Shift, drag, and that is exactly what I get. Now I'm going to add a few more of these shapes onto the slide. So I'm just going to duplicate the shape. So Control D, and I'm going to carry on pressing it until I have all the shapes that I need. And I'm just going to arrange these kind of haphazardly on my slide. So what can I do if I want to align all of these dead in the center of the slide and I want them to have equal distance between my objects? Well, this is where your alignment tools come in. Now, before we get to aligning them, we need to select these objects. And there's a few different methods that you can use when it comes to selecting things in your slide. Now, I could click on the first one, hold down Shift, click on the second one, so on and so forth to select all of my objects. Nice and easy. But what if my objects were overlapping or all on top of each other? I see a lot of presentations where people have many, many different things on a slide. Some of them are overlapping. Some of them are hard to see. How do you select them without having to move things out of the way? Well, this is where you can simply just draw with your cursor a big box around everything, and it's going to select all of the objects. Really useful if you have objects that are overlapping each other on a slide. Another way that we can select is simply to press Control A, which is select all, and then we could hold down Control and deselect that text box for the title, and that's going to select all of our objects. So a few different methods when it comes to selection. Now, what about aligning these on the page? Well, with all of the objects selected, I'm going to go up to Shape Format, and in the Arrange group at the end, we have an alignment drop-down. And this is where you're going to find all of your alignment tools. So what do I want to do with these particular circles? Well, I want to align them to the middle first of all, and that's going to put them into the middle. Now notice that I have unequal gaps in between each of these objects. So I'm going to keep them selected, back up to Align, and this time I'm going to say Distribute horizontally. And now I have equal gap in between each of those objects. Now these still aren't aligned correctly in the context of the slide. So if I want to align these as a group, I would need to group them together first. And this is another really important shortcut key because you're going to find yourself grouping and ungrouping things all the time when you're working in PowerPoint. So to group everything together, Control G. That makes it one object. And because it's one object, I can now align it as one object. So I'm going to go up to alignment again, and this time I'm going to say align center to shift that over. And we're also going to align middle to put it smack bang in the middle of that slide. If I now want to go in and work on these shapes individually, I would need to ungroup my selection first. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Control Shift G. If you're not a fan of keyboard shortcuts, you can also group and ungroup from the Shape Format ribbon. Over in the Arrange group, we have a group drop-down, and there are our options. Okay, so alignment is extremely important. Now, something else which is really useful, which I don't see many people using all that much, is the selection pane. So let me show you what that is. This is another thing that you can get to from that shape format ribbon. Over in the Arrange group, if we click on Selection Pane, it's going to pull up this pane on the right-hand side. Now, what this pane shows you are basically all of the objects that you currently have on your slide. And if you don't rename these, then you're going to be stuck with the default names that PowerPoint gives these objects. Now, if I click on Slide Title, it's going to select it in the slide. If I click on Oval 3, I don't know which one it's going to select until I click on it. It's this first one just here. Same with Oval 4, Oval 5, and Oval 6. And if you have a lot of objects on your slide, being able to identify them quickly is going to be extremely useful because these generic names are just not very meaningful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the color of some of these shapes. So let's make that one orange, we'll make this one gray, and we'll make this one green. So what I would probably do here is with Oval 3 selected in the selection pane, double click, and then I can rename this to Blue Circle so that I can easily identify it. I'm going to do the same for all of the others. So this one would be orange circle. The next one, we'll just call it grey to save a bit of time. There we go, grey. And the final one is going to be like so. So renaming things in the selection pane is going to really help you out. Now, what about if I had overlapping objects? So maybe all of my circles kind of looked like this. What about if I want to work and format the blue circle, which is currently at the back? Well, there's a couple of things I could do here. You don't need to drag the circle out, make your changes, and then drag it back again. You can simply hide everything that's currently covering the thing that you want to work on. So again, using the selection pane, notice we have this little eyeball icon. So what I could say here is I could say hide the green circle, hide the grey one, hide the orange one, and it's going to just leave that blue circle there. So if I need to maybe change the color of this, I can then do that, and then I can unhide everything, and I haven't had to reposition any items on my slide. Similarly, I can use the selection pane to change what we call the Z order of these. And Z order just means when we have objects stacked on top of each other. So if you want to maybe bring the yellow circle to the front, you can simply drag it using the selection pane. Now, the blue circle is actually the yellow circle because we changed the color. So I can drag blue circle up to the top of the selection pane and it's going to bring it to the front. Now I'm going to change that to yellow before it confuses me even more. There we go. So you can rearrange the order of your objects by dragging and dropping in this selection pane. So a super useful tip there. So let's move on. And we're going to go back to talking about crop and fill again. I said it was going to come up again, and here it is. Now, I'm going to show you this again because this is one of those things that I find so useful. Now, currently, I have a little slide here. I've just named it Meet the Team, and this might be something that you see in like corporate presentations. You know, if you're giving a presentation, you might want to introduce people to the people that work on your team. So I have 3 circles here. I've just drawn them using the shape tool, the circle tool. And I've filled the first one with a picture of Julie Dwyer. Now, this has been filled perfectly. It doesn't look distorted, and it's only taken me a few clicks. And again, I use crop and fill to do this. And I've seen people try and fill shapes in all kinds of weird and wonderful ways over the years. So let's look at how we do it properly. So I want to fill this circle with a picture of Marco. So I'm going to right-click and go into Format Shape. We're going to make sure that we're in the fill section over here, and we want to fill with a picture or texture fill. Now, it will basically automatically fill your circle with the last picture that you used, which for me was that background. So I'm going to change my picture source. We're going to insert a picture, I have one saved off to a file, and there is Marco. So let's insert. Now take a look at how it inserts him. It's kind of cut off his head. It's a little bit distorted. We need to use crop and fill to help us sort this out. Also, what I want to do is I want to remove the outline. Can you see we have a very slight outline on this circle? So let's do that first. Up to Shape Format, Shape Outline, No Outline. Now we need to resize Marco so that he fits in this circle. So with him selected, let's jump up to Picture Format. We're going to go into Crop and we're going to choose Fill. And now I can drag him, make adjustments. If I need to make him larger, I can use the resize handles just so he looks exactly perfect in this circle. And when you're doing this type of thing, if you're using people, you kind of want to make sure that they're all equal distance away from the camera. You don't want some people super far away and then some people really close. Once you're happy with how it looks, you can click on Crop and you have a perfectly cropped shape. Let's do the final one very, very quickly. Let's go to Picture or Texture Fill. We're going to insert from File. This time we're going to do Christine. Click on Insert. And I don't think she really needs too much resizing. Let's remove the border, remove the outline, I should say. Up to Picture Format, we're going to use Crop, Fill, and maybe I want to make her slightly larger. So let's drag that out and then we can reposition her in the circle like so. And let's click the top half of that crop button. So really nice and straightforward. Now, a couple of other things on this slide. Now, I want to copy this label across. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate it. And in general, this is what I would do if I was working with my own PowerPoint presentation. I don't tend to create new text boxes. I generally tend to duplicate them or copy and paste. Now notice as I go to move this over, can you see I'm getting those guidelines pop up? And those are what we call smart guides. And these are, again, really useful when it comes to aligning things in your presentation. As I move this text box around, I can see exactly when it's lined up with the other text boxes. And if I start to move across, it will also show me when it's in the center of the image above. So now I know that that's completely aligned with the other text boxes and with the image above. Okay. Now, if when you move things around, you don't see those smart guides pop up, you're going to need to turn them on. Now, if you just right click on the background, on the background of your slide and go to Grid and Guidelines, this is what you want to make sure you have turned on, those smart guides just there. Okay, so that is how you can add an image to a shape and also a little bit more on how you can add or how you can view guidelines when you're moving objects around. Lovely. Let's move on to morph and advanced morph. Before we move on to that, let me just say, when I'm presenting, I can't actually see the chat panel. So if you've got any questions for me, if you could just hold fire until the end. I am on this webinar on my own today, so I can't manage the questions whilst I'm presenting, unfortunately. So hold fire until the end and I will get to your questions. All right, let's talk about the morph and the advanced morph transition. And as I mentioned, this is a new transition in PowerPoint. I'd say new, it's been around for sort of 2 to 3 years. That's new in PowerPoint land. And I'm going to show you how this works, and then I'm going to show you how advanced morph works, because that's something that people don't tend to know too much about. Now, the morph transition basically allows you to add kind of an animated effect to your slides, and it looks really great and really professional. So let me show you how it works. Now, what I have here is basically a completed version of the slide that we were just working on. So I have all 3 of my team just here, and I want to make this look a little bit more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this slide. So let's select it in the slides pane, Control D, so that we get another copy. Now, what I'm going to do on this slide is make some changes. I'm going to grab Marco and I'm going to resize him all the way down. I'm going to make him reasonably small, like so. And I'm also going to resize Christina. Let's drag her down. And notice that when I get to the point where she's the same size as Marco, I get that little line running across the image to tell me it's exactly the same width. So I know that these are the same size. Again, another really helpful thing with smart guides. I'm then going to move these guys down to the bottom of the screen, and I'm going to delete out their headings for now. Let's delete out both of those. And I'm going to put Marco down here as well. I'm then going to grab Julie and I'm going to make her quite a bit bigger. So I'm just holding down Shift as I'm dragging just to make sure that it drags evenly. I'm going to move Julie down a little bit and let's move her heading up here. I'm going to drag it out and I'm just going to align that text. And I'm going to add just a bit of junk text into here. And again, this is another little tip. If you ever kind of want to design layouts of slides and you just need some dummy text to go into a slide, you can do a little piece of code if you type in equals lorem, and then you can specify how many lines of text that you want and how many paragraphs as well. So I'm going to say 2 lines of text in 3 paragraphs. And that's going to give me just some test or dummy text that I can use in my PowerPoint layouts. So I've made a few changes to this slide. What I'm now going to do with the slide selected, I'm going to apply the morph transition. So up to the transitions ribbon, and I'm going to select morph. And you're going to get a little bit of a preview there as to how that looks. Let's run the slideshow so you can see the full effect. So we start on the Meet the Team slide, and then when I move on to the next slide, that's the effect that I get. It's really, really nice and smooth and really adds a little something extra to your presentations. I could go through and add or duplicate this slide and add another one for Marco and for Christine and do exactly the same thing. Make Julie smaller and make these ones bigger so that we can go through all of the team members in a similar way, just with that morph transition applied. So really nice and straightforward. Now, how about the advanced morph transition? This again is something that people don't really tend to know about. So let me show you how this one works. Now I think I'm going to duplicate this slide. Let's duplicate Julie. And I'm going to morph her into a different shape. So maybe I want to morph her into a square as opposed to a circle. Well, I can use advanced morph for that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the shape of Julie. So we're going to go up to shape format, into edit shape, and we're going to put her in, let's put her in a square instead. I'm going to move her across to the other side and let's move her text box over here. So now with Julie selected, I'm going to open up the selection pane and you can see here she's rectangle 2 in the selection pane. Now what you need to do in order to invoke advanced morph is make sure that you link the 2 pictures of Julie, so the one in the previous slide and the one in this slide, using a double exclamation point. So if we double click, I'm going to add exclamation point, and I'm just going to call it morph. You can call it whatever you like. I'm going to go to the previous slide. I'm going to select Julie. And in the selection pane, I'm going to link these 2 images together by calling them the same thing. And the important thing here is that you have those 2 exclamation points. So now make sure that we have our morph transition applied, which we do. If we run this, so let's run the slideshow, when we move on, you can see you get that effect where she's kind of morphing into a completely different shape. So there are all different ways that you can use that advanced morph to add a little bit of interest and really nice, smooth, professional looking transitions into your PowerPoint presentations. So that is morph and advanced morph. Pretty cool stuff. Let's move on to our next hack, and this is actually hack number 10 that I've got in my list. We've got quite a few hacks in here today. I'm going to talk about merging shapes. And again, this is something which you might not be as familiar with. Now, merging shapes in its most basic form is exactly as you would expect it to be. What we can do is we can insert a couple of shapes. So I'm just going to grab a rectangle and let's insert another shape. Let's go for, what should we do here? Let's go for an arrow. And maybe I want to draw this arrow over the top of this shape. And just to make this really obvious, I'm going to change the color of this arrow. Now, what we can do with merge shapes is pretty much what it says on the tin. I can select both of the shapes in here, and then on my shape format ribbon, I have a merge shapes option. So if I choose union, I can basically merge these two shapes together and make them one shape. So if you want to create your own shapes, you can do that using merge shapes and union. And if I select union, it becomes one brand new shape that I can use in my presentation. Now I'm going to undo that and take it back because we have other options in here. We can combine. We can fragment, which basically will split it up into lots of different shapes, like so. So some really cool things that you can do with merge shapes. Now, I'm going to come all the way back out because I want to show you something really cool. This is a really nice effect using merge shapes. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to insert text box, and I'm just going to add the word welcome. And you can use any text that you like. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to change the font that I'm using. Let's change this to something that's quite bold. I think I'm going to go for this one just here, Berlin Sans FB Demi. And I'm going to make this text really big. Let's go for 96. I might even make that a bit bigger. Let's go for 120, like so. I'm just going to put that up there for the time being. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a shape and I'm going to fill it with an image. So again, we're going to be using crop and fill. So let's go to insert. Let's insert a rectangle. And I want to make sure this rectangle is going to be big enough to cover the text. So I'm going to make it that big. Let's fill it with an image. Now, I'm just going to use the image that we've been using throughout this presentation, the one of, I believe it to be Iceland, but I might be wrong, format shape. I'm going to select fill with a picture. We don't want Christine. We want to insert another picture from file. I'm going to use this one. Now, again, we want to do crop and fill so that this isn't distorted. As I said, you'll find yourself using this little tip all the time. So let's go up to picture format. We're going to fill the shape. I can adjust it. So let's move it up a little bit and click on crop. So now that I have my perfectly cropped picture, I'm going to place the picture over the top of the text, and then I'm going to send the picture to the back. So on the picture format tab, we want to send to back. I'm going to select both the picture and the text, and then we're going to use our merge shapes, but this time we're going to say intersect and take a look at what you get. You get text that's filled with an image. I think that looks really, really cool. So let's make it a bit bigger so we can take in the full beauty of that image-filled text. Notice we have an outline around the outside. If you don't like that, it's just a case of removing the shape outline like so. I'm going to keep the shape outline. I quite like that. And of course, then you could really kind of pimp this out. You could go to shape effects, maybe add something like a shadow, or you could go a stage further and add a really nice reflection effect that would look really nice on some kind of title slide. So with all of these things here, you're getting to see a few more tools that you might not have used in PowerPoint before, and hopefully you can sort of see the benefit and how you might incorporate some of these techniques into your own presentations. So I really like that. I think it's a really nice, cool looking effect. All right, let's move on to the eyedropper tool. Now, again, this is something that I tend to forget that the eyedropper tool exists in PowerPoint, and I always tend to think that everybody knows that it exists and is using it all the time. And what I find is that it's less well known than what I actually think it is. And the eyedropper tool is probably the single best thing in PowerPoint that you can use to make your presentations look consistent. And when I say look consistent, I mean consistent in the color palette that you're using. A thing that you really need to consider when you're putting together presentations are not only the fonts that you're using, that they all work well together and don't look messy, but also the color palette that you're using. It might be that you use a template from your organization and you're limited to branded colors, or it might be that you just have your own palette of colors that you like to use and you want to make sure that every slide that you create is kind of within that color palette. And the eyedropper tool can really help you with that. Now, I'm just going to delete out this title because it's going to get in the way. Now, let's just use our good old image of Iceland again. I'm going to use that image and I'm going to fill half of this slide with that image. Now, again, if you want to do a layout where you have half of the slide as an image and then maybe some text, that's really nice if you have like section dividers in your presentation. What you can do to help you with that is right-click on the slide and you could add vertical or horizontal guidelines. So I'm going to add a vertical one, which gives me a line exactly halfway down the page. So now if I want to resize an image, I know exactly what the halfway point is. So let's insert our image again. As I said, I love using images in my presentations. We're going to use this one. And I'm going to resize it like that. And then I'm going to use crop and fill again. So back to crop. Let's go to fill, and this time I only want it halfway so I can use that guideline and just drag it across. Let's click crop, fill. I can then reposition it if I need to. When I'm happy, click the top half of the crop button and I have an image that's perfectly sized in half of the slide. We can then right click and then turn off those guidelines. So I might have this in half of the page. I might have some kind of title over the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab Control C, this title. I'm just going to paste it over here so that we have something to work with. So maybe I have something that looks like that, and maybe I have some text underneath. Now, I've made it so that all of my titles kind of match this background image, but what if you wanted to change the color of this title, but you wanted it to be in keeping with the overall theme, the overall color palette that you're using? Well, this is where we can use the eyedropper utility. And you can use this to fill text, to fill shapes, to fill basically any object or graphic that you have on your slide. So we're going to use it to fill text. I'm going to go to the font color drop down. We have eyedropper at the bottom. Now notice as I drag this little eyedropper, and you can see my cursor has changed to a little pipette, I think they're called. It allows me to pick up colors from anything that's currently in use in the slide. And this really helps you keep your slide colors consistent. So if I wanted to use maybe this darker green color, I can click it and it's going to change that heading to that particular color. As I said, this is a great way of keeping your color palette consistent. And this will work if you were to insert some kind of shape. So let's insert a quick square just here. If I wanted to fill that, when I go to shape fill, I also have eyedropper just here, which will allow me to go through and again pick up a color from the image. So a great way to keep everything consistent. Eyedropper utility, another one of my favorite things. Now, another quick tip, this is hack number 12, replacing fonts. Now, this is particularly useful if you want to very quickly change all of the fonts in your presentation. And I find that this comes into play if I've ever received a presentation from a client or a third party, and maybe they use Times New Roman font. And I like to use Calibri font. But I don't want to go through every single slide, selecting the text boxes and changing the font. I just want a way of changing it all in one go. And that is where replace fonts comes in. Now I think I have mostly Lato font used in this presentation. I think, yes, I have Lato. So what I could do here, if I wanted to replace all of the Lato font with Calibri, I can simply go to the Home tab. All the way over at the end in the editing group, we can choose replace fonts. Now it's going to pick up fonts that you currently have in use. For me, that is Lato, and then you can just simply select what you want to change it to. So if I go through, I can choose, let's go for Calibri. Where are you, Calibri? There you are. Like so, click replace, and in one go, everything on every slide should now be Calibri font. So really, really super quick. Next tip, hack number 13. This is setting a default shape. Now, if you're anything like me, I tend to draw a lot of shapes in my slides. I'm using shapes all of the time. And what you'll notice is that when you go to insert and you select a shape to draw, it's always going to be, well, for me at least, this blue color. Now, it takes this default color from the theme that you're using. Excuse me. From the theme that you're using in PowerPoint. So I'm using just the standard Office theme, and in general, if you use that theme, your default shape is this blue fill. Now, a lot of the time, I find myself inserting a shape and then going through and changing the shape fill, changing the shape outline to match the style that I like to use. Now, you don't have to do that. You can actually set your own style as the default shape. So whenever you draw a shape, it's going to be in your default style. So all you need to do is create a shape and just change it to how you want it to look. So maybe I want this to be, let's go for, I don't know, an orange color. Maybe I want to change the outline weight. Let's pump that up to really thick. That looks kind of ugly, but hopefully you get the idea. Let's change the outline color to, let's go for this dark orange. Maybe that is how I want all of my shapes to look when I add them to my presentation. So what I can do is simply right click and go to Set as Default Shape, like so. So now every time I draw a shape, it's going to be in that default style. Okay. Another quick tip here when it comes to drawing shapes, let me just delete a couple of these out so we have a bit more room. You'll notice that if you have to draw multiple shapes on a page, you'll notice that you only get to draw them once before the shape tool deactivates. So if I want to draw 6 rectangles, I can only draw one and then it deactivates. So I have to go back and go to Insert Shape, which is a bit of a pain. So if you know that you have to draw a lot of shapes on a slide, what you can do is lock it into drawing mode. So if we go to shapes, if I want to draw a whole load of rectangles, I can right click and choose lock drawing mode. And that just enables me to just carry on drawing and it doesn't deactivate in between each one. If I then want to deactivate it, I can either press the escape key on my keyboard or I can go back to the shape, right click and unlock it from there. Okay, so 2 quick hacks when it comes to default shapes and locking that drawing mode. Now we have about 8 minutes left. I have a few more things to show you, so let's try and whiz through these as quickly as possible. The next thing, which is really cool, and this is something that's reasonably new, about 2 years old in PowerPoint, and that is slide and summary zoom. Now there is a third one out of these new zoom options. We have slide, summary and section zoom. Now I'm only going to show you slide and summary zoom because you'll get the idea as to how they work, and you can use section zoom if you want. Now these are really cool. What they allow you to do is basically, if we start with slide zoom, we can add slides to one slide and then zoom into those slides. Now, that might not make much sense, so let's take a look at it in action. Now, on this page, we're going to go to Insert. In the links group in the middle, we have this zoom button. and you'll see we have summary, section, and slide zoom. So let's choose slide zoom. And it's basically going to open up a window that contains all of the slides that you have in your presentation. And you can go through and select ones that you want your users or whoever is viewing this presentation to be able to jump to quickly. So maybe I want them to be able to jump to slide 1, slide 3, slide 4, and slide 8, for example. Let's insert. It's now going to show me those slides in miniature. And I can position these wherever I want to on my page. So I'm just going to put these, and you can take your time lining these up. Let's just put these here and here, like so. Now, some of these kind of blend into the background a little bit here, so we probably will want to add a border. So let's select all of them. Notice we have a zoom ribbon. So we can go to zoom border and we can add, let's add a nice dark blue border, just so they stand out a bit from the background of the slide. Now, what happens with these is when you run the slideshow, they're going to get a page like this, and these become links that they can click on to jump directly to that particular slide. And it has this really nice zoom in effect. If I click again, it's going to move on to the next slide and the next slide, so on and so forth, and you're going through your presentation. Now, the way that I kind of see these are kind of like a choose your own story way. If anybody used to have those choose your own storybooks when you were younger, you can kind of guide users down a path through your presentation. So this is really taking a step away from a very linear way of moving through a PowerPoint deck. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can do all kinds of things. Now, notice with this, when you zoom into a slide, when you move on to the next slide, it's just going to carry on from that point through your presentation. What you might want is that once they've read that slide, it zooms them back out to this slide zoom page. Now, to do that, if you click on the slide, go up to the Zoom tab, you want to make sure you have Return to Zoom in this first group selected. And you need to apply that to all of the slides. You can't do them in one go, so you have to go through and do them like that. So now that means when you play the presentation, they click on a slide, they read the information. When they click again, it zooms them back out to that main page, and they can then choose which route they want to take through the presentation. So that is slide zoom. Now, summary zoom works in a very similar way, but in general, you would see this at the start of a presentation. It kind of is a bit like a table of contents almost for your presentation, but very similar to slide zoom. So let's quickly take a look at it. Insert, zoom, summary zoom, same kind of deal. I've already got some slides selected here. Let's just click insert. I could have all the different sections or areas, parts of my presentation on here. I can add a title, choose your interest, something like that. I can't type tonight, it seems. There we go. And then we could set these to zoom back out, all of that kind of stuff. And when we run the slideshow, it means they can basically choose their route through the presentation, and they can zoom in and zoom back out again. If we were to select something like Meet the Team, when we click, it's going to zoom back out again. We could set it up so that we don't come straight back out. You might want it to run through the section first. You just turn off that Return to Zoom option. So really nice ways to direct people through your presentation. All right, what is the time? We've got about 3 minutes. I have a few more hacks to show you. The next one is remove background. Now, I will say that this can be useful in some situations. I am not in any way trying to suggest that PowerPoint is a substitute for Photoshop, but it does do a reasonably decent job at removing backgrounds from images. So maybe you've downloaded an image that you want to use, but it has a busy background. You just want to get rid of the background and maybe cut out the person or whatever the subject is. PowerPoint has tools that aren't too bad at doing this if you have a reasonably plain background. That has been my experience. If you have a very busy background, sometimes it does struggle, but with images with plain backgrounds, it works pretty well. Let me show you very quickly. Now, I'm just going to remove this title. Let's go to the Insert tab. Now, I'm going to insert a picture from Pexels. Instead of going to the website, notice at the end here, I have Pexels installed as an add-in into PowerPoint. And this is going to be my next point when we talk about add-ins. You can install all different add-ins to extend the capability of PowerPoint. So I have Pexels, and I also have the Noun project. So this is basically free icons. So I can access both of these from within PowerPoint as opposed to having to go to the website externally. Now, if you're looking for add-ins, you'll find them underneath this Get Add-in section in the middle. You can go through and take a look at all of the different add-ins that you can add into PowerPoint. And some of the most popular ones are things like Pexels. If you're looking for it, just type in search, Pexels, and it's this one just here. All you need to do is click on the Add button, and then you'll find it at the end here, and it means that you can just search for images without leaving PowerPoint. So I'm going to search for an image of a kingfisher. There we go. And I'm going to use this image here because it has a reasonably plain background. And that's a really nice image. Let's close this down. I'm going to remove the yellow background because I want to put this image of a kingfisher onto a completely different background. So what we're going to do is select the picture, up to picture format, and we're going to choose the Remove Background tool. Now, PowerPoint will have an attempt at removing the background. Everything you see in purple is what it's going to remove. Now I can see here it hasn't got it quite right, so I need to mark some areas to keep. Notice that on the ribbon we have two options, mark areas to keep, mark areas to remove. So I'm going to say mark areas to keep, and then using my pencil I'm going to draw over where we want to remove the purple. And let's do it just there, and also this little log that the kingfisher is sitting on. There we go, not bad. I now want to remove this yellow as well. So I'm going to say mark areas to remove, and then I'm going to draw a big line across this yellow. That looks pretty good. If I say keep changes, I've now cut out that image of the kingfisher. And this can look particularly stunning, I would say. I think it looks stunning. Particularly effective is the word I was looking for, if we put this onto a different background. So what I can do is go to Insert. I'm going to open Pexels again, and let's just add an image of a jungle. I'm going to use this one just here. I'm going to send the image to the back. And now I have my kingfisher, and take a look at that. It does a pretty good job. As I said, it's not Photoshop, but it's good enough for PowerPoint presentations. This would look really effective as a title slide. You might want to add a transparent overlay so it's not as vibrant, and maybe put some text on there. Okay, so think about using that Remove Background tool. Now, the final couple of things. What is the time? We're just over 7:30. I have a couple more things to show you, probably going to be about 5 more minutes. If you can hang on, great. If you need to leave, that's absolutely fine. You will receive the recording. I just really do want to show you custom slideshows before we end. Now, custom slideshows can be really useful if you want to maybe have slides which automatically scroll. So maybe you're putting on an event, and you've probably seen when you've attended an event, you might have a PowerPoint presentation up on a big screen, and every 10 seconds it moves to a different slide, and then it just loops around and around. The way that I use custom slideshows, particularly when I'm training or even if I'm hosting a meeting or something like that, there's always that little bit of dead time at the beginning before the training session or the meeting begins. And what most people do when they come to your presentation or meeting is they generally sit down and they start fiddling with their phone because there's nothing really else to do before we're waiting for this presentation to start. So what I like to do is create a custom slideshow which will get their interest. It will get them looking at the screen. And what I like to do is basically have scrolling different slides with different pieces of information on them. So it might be that I have my contact details on one slide. Maybe I have a slide which says, did you know that you can do this, this, or this? Maybe I have a slide that has some kind of inspirational quote, or maybe I'm playing a video. Or maybe there's some things that I want them to consider or think about before the meeting or before the training. It gives them something to look at so they're not just sitting there playing on their phone whilst we're waiting for everybody to arrive. So in general, I'll set up a few slides like this, and then I'll set them up as a custom slideshow and have them rotating before the meeting begins. So I'm going to use these 3 slides. Let's select all of them. And because I want these to be first, I'm going to drag them to the top of the presentation. Let's just put them up here. Now, what you want to do is if you want these to automatically scroll round, so maybe I want them to change every 5 seconds, you need to add timings into your slides. So if we go to the slideshow ribbon, we're going to check or click on rehearse timings. Notice in the top corner, we now have a recorder going. So when it gets to 5 seconds, I'm going to move on to the next slide. It's basically recording what I'm doing. 5 seconds again, let's move on to the next one. This is the last slide, so at 5 seconds, I'm going to press escape to stop rehearsing those timings. I'm going to say, yes, I want to keep the slide timings, and now I can set up a custom slideshow using just these slides. So let's go up to custom slideshow, custom shows, new. I'm going to call it Deb intro, and I can choose which slides I want to use scrolling in my intro. So it's slides 1, 2, and 3. And click on OK. The final thing I need to do is go to Set Up Slideshow. And what I want to say is I want these slides to loop continuously until escape, and I want to use my custom show. If you have more than one setup, make sure you select the correct one from the drop down, and you want to make sure that you're using your timings. Click on OK. So now I normally then just start the slideshow, and without me clicking every 5 seconds, this should move on to the next slide like it does. And this is just going to loop around until I choose to escape. So it's a really nice thing to have in the background. Also good for events and things like that. Now, one thing you need to remember with this is that if you then want to go into your actual presentation, when you click Run Slideshow, it's just going to go back to your custom slideshow. So you need to remember to go back to Set Up Slideshow and change it back to Show All Slides and not just your custom slideshow. Otherwise, you're going to be stuck in an endless loop of your custom show. All right. Okay. The final thing, I think we're going to end it there. There was a couple of small things I wanted to show you, but I don't want to keep you too much longer. The last thing I wanted to show you was really just this resource list. I'm going to keep this in the presentation so that you can refer to these. These are websites that I go to, really useful free resources. You don't have to pay for any of these. So if you're looking for somewhere with high quality images, you've got a few websites there. Icons, you've got some just there. The Noun Project, I will say a lot of the icons on the Noun Project are free. To have access to the full library, it is subscription. So I think it's $40 a year. If you use a lot of icons, it's worth the investment because they have hundreds of thousands of icons on there. And then also I've just got some font sites listed out there if you like different fonts. And also that Font Joy website that we went to earlier, which will help you decide which fonts work well together in a presentation. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all learn at least one thing that you think is going to help you. Have a great night, a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To see the full course that this video came from, click over there. And Click over there to see more videos from Simon Says It.